Chapter 8: The Flywheel and the Doom Loop. Revolution means turning the wheel. Igor Stravinsky. Picture a huge, heavy flywheel. A massive metal disc mounted horizontally on an axle, about 30 feet in diameter, 2 feet thick, and weighing about 5,000 pounds. Now imagine that your task is to get the flywheel rotating on the axle as fast and long as possible. Pushing with great effort, you get the flywheel to inch forward, moving almost imperceptibly at first. You keep pushing, and after 2 or 3 hours of persistent effort, you get the flywheel to complete one entire turn. You keep pushing, and the flywheel begins to move a bit faster, and with continued great effort, you move it around a second rotation. You keep pushing in an intelligent, consistent direction. 3 turns, 4 turns, 5, 6, the flywheel builds up speed. 7, 8, you keep pushing. 9, 10, it builds momentum. 11, 12, moving faster with each turn. 20, 30, 50, 100, 1,000. Then, at some point, breakthrough. The momentum of the thing kicks in your favor, hurling the flywheel forward, turn after turn. Whoosh! Its own heavy weight working for you. You're pushing no harder than during the first rotation, but the flywheel goes faster and faster. Each turn of the flywheel builds upon work done earlier, compounding your investment of effort. 1,000 times faster, then 10,000, then 100,000. The huge, heavy disc flies forward with almost unstoppable momentum. Now, suppose someone came along and asked, "So what was the one big push that caused this thing to go so fast?" You wouldn't be able to answer. It's just a nonsense question. Was it the first push? The second? The 5th? The 100th? No, it was all of them. All of them added together in an overall accumulation of effort applied in a consistent direction. Sure, some pushes may have been larger than other pushes, but any single heave, no matter how large, reflects a small fraction of the entire cumulative effect on the flywheel. Build-up and breakthrough. The flywheel image captures the overall feel of what it was like inside the companies as they went from good to great. No matter how dramatic the end result, the good to great transformations never happened in one fell swoop. There was no single defining action, no grand program, no one killer innovation, no solitary lucky break, no wrenching revolution. Good to great comes about by a cumulative process, step by step, action by action, decision by decision, turn by turn of the flywheel. That adds up to sustained and spectacular results. Yet to read the media accounts of the companies, you might draw an entirely different conclusion. Often the media does not cover a company until the flywheel is already turning at 1,000 RPMs per minute. This entirely skews our perception of how such transformations happen, making it seem as if they jumped right to breakthrough as some sort of an overnight metamorphosis. On August 27, 1984, Forbes magazine published an article on Circuit City. It was the first national-level profile ever published on the company. It wasn't that big of an article, just 2 pages, and it questioned whether Circuit City's recent growth could continue. Still, there it was, the first public acknowledgement that Circuit City had broken through. The journalist had just identified a hot new company, almost like an overnight success story. This particular overnight success story, however, had been more than a decade in the making. Alan Wurtzel had inherited CEO responsibility from his father in 1973, with the firm close to bankruptcy. First, he rebuilt his executive team and undertook an objective look at the brutal facts, both internal and external. In 1974, still struggling with a crushing debt load, Wurtzel and his team began to experiment with a warehouse showroom style of retailing, large inventories of name brands, discount pricing, and immediate delivery. And they built a prototype of this model in Richmond, Virginia, to sell appliances. In 1976, the company began to experiment with selling consumer electronics in that warehouse showroom concept. And in 1977, it transformed the concept into the first ever Circuit City store. The concept met with success, and the company began to systematically convert its stereo stores into Circuit City stores. In 1982, with 9 years of accumulated turns on the flywheel, Wurtzel and his team committed fully to the concept of the Circuit City Superstore. Over the next 5 years, as it shifted entirely to the concept, Circuit City generated the highest total return to shareholders of any company on the New York Stock Exchange. From 1982 to 1999, Circuit City generated stock returns 22 times better than the market, handily beating Intel, Walmart, GE, Hewlett-Packard, and Coca-Cola. We shouldn't be surprised that Circuit City then found itself a prime subject for media attention. Whereas we found no articles of any significance in the decade leading up to that transition point, we found 97 articles worth examining in the decade after the transition, 22 of them significant pieces. It's as if the company hadn't even existed prior to that, despite having traded on a major stock exchange since 1968, and despite the remarkable progress made by Wurtzel and his team in the decade leading up to that breakthrough point. The Circuit City experience reflects a common pattern. In case after case, we found fewer articles in the decade leading up to the point of the transition than in the decade after, by an average factor of nearly 3 times. For example, Ken Iverson and Sam Siegel began turning the Nucor flywheel in 1965. For 10 years, no one paid any attention, certainly not the financial press or even the other steel companies. If you'd asked executives at Bethlehem Steel or U.S. Steel about the Nucor threat in 1970, they would have laughed, if they even recognized the company name, which is doubtful. By 1975, the year of its transition point on the stock chart, Nucor had already built its third mini-mill, long established its culture of productivity, and was well on the way to becoming the most profitable steel company in America. Yet, the first major article in Business Week did not appear until 1978, 13 years after the start of the transition. 13 years! And not in Fortune until 16 years out. From 1965 to 1975, we found only 11 articles on Nucor, none of them significant. Then, from 1976 through 1995, we collected 96 articles on Nucor, 40 of them being major profiles or nationally prominent features. You're probably thinking, but we should expect that. Of course, these companies would get more coverage after they became wildly successful. What's so important about that? Here's what's important. We've allowed the way transitions look from the outside to drive our perception of what they must feel like to those going through them on the inside. From the outside, they look like a dramatic, almost revolutionary breakthrough. But from the inside, they feel completely different, more like an organic development process. Picture an egg just sitting there. No one pays it much attention until one day the egg cracks open and out jumps a chicken. All the major magazines and newspapers jump on the event writing feature stories. Transformation of egg to chicken. Remarkable revolution of the egg. Stunning turnaround at egg. As if the egg had undergone some overnight metamorphosis, radically altering itself into a chicken. But what does it look like from the chicken's point of view? It's a completely different story. While the world ignored this dormant-looking egg, the chicken was evolving, growing, developing, incubating. From the chicken's point of view, cracking the egg is simply one more step in a long chain of steps leading up to that moment. A big step, to be sure, but hardly the radical, single-step transformation it looks like to those watching from outside the egg. You might think it's a silly analogy, but I'm using it to highlight a very important finding from our research. We kept thinking that we'd find the one big thing, the miracle moment that defined breakthrough. We even pushed for it in our interviews. But the Good to Great executives simply could not pinpoint a single key event or moment in time that exemplified the transition. Sometimes they even chafed against the whole idea of allocating points and prioritizing factors. In every Good to Great company, at least one of the interviewees gave an unprompted admonishment, saying something along the lines of, "Look, you can't dissect this thing into a series of nice little boxes and factors, or identify the moment of aha, or the one big thing. It was a whole bunch of interlocking pieces that built one upon another. Got it?" Even in the most dramatic case in our study, Kimberly-Clark selling the mills, the executives described an organic cumulative process. "Darwin did not change the direction of the company overnight," said one Kimberly executive. "He evolved it over time." "The transition wasn't like night and day," said another. "It was gradual, and I don't think it was entirely clear to everybody until a few years into it." Of course, selling the mills was a gigantic push on the flywheel, but it was only one push. After selling the mills, the full transformation into the #1 paper-based consumer products company required thousands of additional pushes on the flywheel, big and small, accumulated one on top of another. It took years to gain enough momentum for the press to openly herald Kimberly-Clark's shift from good to great. Forbes magazine wrote, "When Kimberly-Clark decided to go head-to-head against Procter & Gamble, this magazine predicted disaster. What a dumb idea." As it turns out, it wasn't a dumb idea. It was a smart idea. The amount of time between the two Forbes articles, the one that predicted disaster and the one that said it wasn't a disaster, 21 years. While working on the project, we made a habit of asking executives who visited our research laboratory what they wanted to know from the research. One CEO asked, "What did they call what they were doing? Did they have a name for it? How did they talk about it at the time?" Isn't that a wonderful question? We went back to look. The astounding answer. You want to know what they called it at the time? They didn't call it anything. The Good to Great companies had no name for their transformations. There was no launch event, no tagline, no programmatic feel whatsoever. Some said they weren't even aware. They weren't even aware that a major transformation was underway until they were well into it. It was at times more obvious to them after the fact than at the time. Then it began to dawn on us. There was no miracle moment. Although it may have looked like a single-stroke breakthrough to those peering in from the outside, it was anything but that to people experiencing the transformation from within. Rather, it was a quiet, deliberate process of figuring out what needed to be done to create the best future results and then simply taking those steps, one after another, turn by turn of the flywheel. After pushing on that flywheel in a consistent direction over an extended period of time, they'd hit a point of breakthrough. When we read this paragraph, we noted its applicability to our study and decided to adopt these terms in describing the Good to Great companies. I'd like to share with you a series of representative quotes from the interviews that illustrate this whole idea of no miracle moment in Good to Great. As you listen to these, let them just wash over you as you hear executives talking about what it felt like to go through the transitions. Abbott Laboratories. It wasn't a blinding flash or a sudden revelation from above. Our change was a major change, and yet, in many respects, simply a series of incremental changes. This is what made the change successful. We did this in a nice, stepwise way, and there was always a lot of common denominators between what we had already mastered and what we were embarking on. Circuit City. The transition to focus on the superstore didn't happen overnight. We first considered the concept in 1974, but we didn't convert fully to Circuit City superstores until about 10 years later, after we'd refined the concept and built enough momentum to bet our whole future on it. Fannie Mae. There was no one magical event, no one turning point. It was a combination of things, more of an evolution, though the end results were dramatic. Gillette. We didn't really make a big conscious decision or launch a big program to initiate a major change or transition. Individually and collectively, we were coming to conclusions about what we could do to dramatically improve our performance. Kimberly-Clark. I don't think it was done as bluntly as it sounds. These things don't happen overnight. They grow. The ideas grow and mushroom and come into being. Kroger. It wasn't a flash from the blue. We all had been watching experimental superstars develop, and we were pretty well persuaded that the industry would go that way. The major thing that Lyle Everingham did was to say that we're going to change beginning now on a very deliberate basis. Nucor. We did not make a decision that this was what we stood for at any specific moment. It evolved through many agonizing arguments and fights. I am not sure that we knew exactly what we were fighting for until we looked back and said that we were fighting to establish who we were going to be. Philip Morris. It's impossible to think of one big thing that would exemplify a shift from good to great because our success was evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary, building success upon success. I don't know that there was any single event. Pitney Bowes. We didn't talk so much of change. We recognized early on not so much that we needed to change, but that we needed to evolve, which recognizes that we've got to do things differently. We realized that evolution is a whole different concept than change. Walgreens. There was no seminal meeting or epiphany moment, no one big bright light that came on like a light bulb. It was sort of an evolution thing. Wells Fargo. It wasn't a single switch that was thrown at one time. Little by little, the themes became more apparent and stronger. When Carl became CEO, there wasn't any great wrenching. Dick led one stage of the evolution, and Carl the next, and it just proceeded smoothly, rather than an abrupt shift. When teaching this point, I sometimes use an example from outside my research that perfectly illustrates the idea. The UCLA Bruins basketball dynasty of the 1960s and early 1970s. Most basketball fans know that the Bruins won 10 NCAA championships in 12 years, under the legendary coach John Wooden. But do you know how many years Wooden coached the Bruins before his first NCAA championship? 15 years. From 1948 to 1963, Wooden worked in relative obscurity before winning his first championship in 1964. Year by year, Coach Wooden built the underlying foundations, developing a recruiting system, implementing a consistent philosophy, and refining the full court press style of play. No one paid too much attention to the quiet, soft-spoken coach and his team until, wham! They hit breakthrough and systematically crushed every serious competitor for more than a decade. Like the Wooden dynasty, lasting transformations from good to great follow a general pattern of build-up followed by breakthrough. In some cases, the build-up to breakthrough stage takes a long time. In other cases, a shorter time. At Circuit City, the build-up stage lasted 9 years. At Nucor, 10 years. Whereas at Gillette, it only took 5 years, at Fannie Mae only 3 years, and at Pitney Bowes about 2 years. But no matter how short or long it took, every good to great transformation followed the same basic pattern, accumulating momentum turn by turn of the flywheel until buildup transformed into breakthrough. Credit for the terms buildup and breakthrough should go to David S. Landis and his book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations. On page 200, Landis writes, the question is really twofold. First, why and how did any country break through the crust of habit and conventional knowledge to this new mode of production? Turning to the first, I would stress build-up. the accumulation of knowledge and know-how, and breakthrough, reaching and passing thresholds. It's important to understand that following the build-up, breakthrough, flywheel model is not just a luxury of circumstance. People who say, hey, but we've got constraints that prevent us from taking this longer-term approach, they should keep in mind that the good to great companies followed this model no matter how dire their short-term circumstances. Deregulation in the case of Wells Fargo, looming bankruptcy in the cases of Nucor and Circuit City, potential takeover threats in the cases of Gillette and Kroger, or million-dollar-a-day losses in the case of Fannie Mae. This also applies to managing the short-term pressures of Wall Street. I just don't agree with those who say you can't build an enduring great company because Wall Street won't let you, said David Maxwell of Fannie Mae. We communicated with the analysts to educate them on what we were doing and where we were going. At first, a lot of people didn't buy into that. You just have to accept that. But once we got through the dark days, we responded by doing better every single year. After a few years, because of our actual results, we became a hot stock and never looked back. And a hot stock it was. During Maxwell's first 2 years, which were in the early 1980s, the stock lagged behind the market, but then it took off. From the end of 1984 to 2000, $1 invested in Fannie Mae multiplied 64 times, beating the general market, including the NASDAQ of the late 1990s, by nearly 6 times. The good to great companies were subject to the same short-term pressures from Wall Street as the comparison companies. Yet, unlike the comparison companies, they had the patience and discipline to follow the build-up, breakthrough, flywheel model despite these pressures. And in the end, they attained extraordinary results by Wall Street's own measure of success. The key we learned is to harness the flywheel to manage these short-term pressures. One particularly elegant method for doing so came from Abbott Laboratories, using a mechanism it called the Blue Plans. Each year, Abbott would tell Wall Street analysts that it expected to grow earnings a specified amount, say 15%. At the same time, it would set an internal goal of a much higher growth rate, say 25% or even 30%. Meanwhile, it kept a rank-ordered list of proposed entrepreneurial projects that had not yet been funded, the Blue Plans. Toward the end of the year, Abbott would pick a number that exceeded analyst expectations, but that fell short of its actual growth. It would then take the difference between the make the analysts happy growth and the actual growth and channel those funds into the Blue Plans. It was a brilliant mechanism for managing short-term pressures while systematically investing in the future. We found no evidence of anything like the Blue Plans at Abbott's comparison company. Instead, executives at Upjohn would pump up the stock with a sales job. Buy into our future! Reverently intoning the phrase, investing for the long term, especially when the company failed to deliver current results. Upjohn continually threw money after harebrained projects like Rogaine baldness cure, attempting to circumvent buildup and jump right to breakthrough with a big hit. Indeed, Upjohn reminded us of a gambler, putting a lot of chips on red at Las Vegas and saying, see, we're investing in the future. Of course, when the future arrived, the promised results rarely appeared. Not surprisingly, Abbott became a consistent performer and a favorite holding on Wall Street, while Upjohn became a consistent disappointment. From 1959 to Abbott's point of breakthrough in 1974, the two stocks, Abbott and Upjohn, roughly tracked each other. Then they dramatically diverged, with Upjohn falling more than 6 times behind Abbott before being acquired in 1995. All the good to great companies effectively managed Wall Street during their build-up breakthrough years, and they saw no contradiction between the two. They simply focused on accumulating results, often practicing the time-honored discipline of under-promising and over-delivering. And as the results began to accumulate, as the flywheel built momentum turn upon turn and quarter upon quarter and year upon year, the investing community came along with great enthusiasm. The good to great companies understood a simple truth. Tremendous power exists in the fact of continued improvement and the delivery of results. Point to tangible accomplishments, however incremental at first, and show how these steps fit into the context of an overall concept that will work. When you do this in such a way that people see and feel the build-up momentum, when they can feel that flywheel starting to accumulate the turns and the clicks, they will line up with enthusiasm. We came to call this the flywheel effect, and it applies not only to outside investors, but also to internal constituents. Let me share a story from the research. At a pivotal point in the study, members of the team nearly revolted. Throwing their interview notes on the table, they asked, "Do we have to keep asking that stupid question?" Yes. Which stupid question? The one about commitment, alignment, and how they managed change. That's not a stupid question, I replied. It's one of the most important. Well, said a team member, a lot of the executives we're interviewing from the good to great companies, well, they think it's a stupid question. Some don't even understand the question. Yes, we need to keep asking it. I said we need to be consistent across the interviews. And besides, it's even more interesting that they don't understand the question. So keep probing. We've got to understand how they overcame resistance to change and got people lined up. I'd fully expected that getting everyone lined up, creating alignment, to use the jargon, would be one of the top challenges faced by executives working to turn good into great. After all, nearly every executive that I'd worked with at the laboratory had asked this question in one form or another. How do we get the boat turned? How do we get people committed to the new vision? How do we motivate people to line up? How do we get people to embrace change? Turns out to be the wrong questions. To my great surprise, we did not find the question of alignment to be a key challenge faced by the good to great leaders. To be clear, the good to great companies did get incredible commitment, did get alignment. They artfully managed change. But they never really spent much time thinking about it. It was utterly transparent to them. We learned that under the right conditions, the problems of commitment, alignment, motivation, change just melt away. They largely take care of themselves. Consider Kroger. How do you get a company of over 50,000 people, cashiers, baggers, shelf stockers, produce washers, all kinds of folk, to embrace a radical new strategy that will eventually change virtually every aspect of how the company builds and runs grocery stores? The answer? You don't. Not in one big event or program, anyway. Jim Herring, the Level 5 leader who initiated the transformation at Kroger, told us that he avoided any attempts at hoopla and motivation. Instead, he and his team began turning the flywheel, creating tangible evidence that their plans made sense. Said Herring, we presented what we were doing in such a way that people saw our accomplishments. We tried to bring our plans to successful conclusion step by step so that the mass of people would gain confidence from the successes, not just the words. Herring understood that the way to get people lined up behind a bold new vision for the future is to turn the flywheel consistent with that vision. From 2 turns to 4, from 4 to 8, to 8 to 16, 16 to 32, 64, 100, 1,000, and so forth, and then to say, see what we're doing and how well it's working? Extrapolate from that, and that's where we're going. The good to great companies during their transition years tended to not publicly proclaim big goals at the outset. Rather, they began to spin the flywheel, understanding turn to action, step after step, turn after turn. And after the flywheel built up momentum, they'd look up and say, hey, if we just keep pushing on this thing, there's no reason we can't accomplish X. For example, Nucor began turning the flywheel in 1965, at first just trying to avoid bankruptcy. Then later, building its first steel mills, simply because it could not find a reliable supplier. Nucor people believed that they had a knack for making steel better and cheaper than anyone else, so they built 2 and then 3 additional mini-mills. They gained customers, then more customers, then more customers. Whoosh, the flywheel built momentum. Turn by turn, month by month, year by year, you could feel this thing growing. Then around 1975, it dawned on the Nucor people that if they just kept pushing on the flywheel, they could become the #1 most profitable steel company in America. Explained Marvin Pullman, I remember talking with Ken Iverson in 1975, and he said, Marv, I think we can become the #1 steel company in the United States. 1975, and I said to him, now Ken, when are you going to be #1? I don't know, he said, but if we just keep doing what we're doing, there's no reason why we can't become #1. It took over 2 decades. But Nucor kept pushing the flywheel, eventually generating greater profits than any other steel company on the Fortune 1000 list. When you let the flywheel do the talking, you don't need to fervently communicate your goals. People can just extrapolate from the momentum of the flywheel for themselves. Hey, if we just keep doing this, look where we can go. As people decide among themselves to turn the fact of potential into the fact of results, the goal almost sets itself. Stop and think for a minute. What do the right people want more than anything else? They want to be part of a winning team. They want to contribute to producing visible, tangible results. They want to feel the excitement of being involved in something that is just flat out outstanding, that flat out works. When the right people see a simple plan, Hedgehog, born of confronting the brutal facts, a plan developed from understanding, not bravado, they are likely to say, that'll work, count me in. When they see the monolithic unity of the executive team behind the simple plan and the selfless, dedicated qualities of Level 5 leadership, they'll drop their cynicism. When people begin to feel the magic of momentum, when they begin to see tangible results, when they can feel that flywheel beginning to build speed, it's almost physical. That's when the bulk of people line up, throw their shoulders against the wheel, and push. The doom loop. We found a very different pattern at the comparison companies. Instead of that quiet, deliberate process of figuring out what needed to be done and then simply doing it, the comparison companies frequently launched new programs, often with great fanfare and hoopla aimed at motivating the troops, only to see the programs fail to produce sustained results. They sought that single defining action, the grand program, the one killer innovation, the miracle moment that would allow them to skip the arduous build-up stage and jump right to breakthrough. They would push the flywheel in one direction, then stop, change course, throw it in a new direction, and then they would stop, change course, and throw it into yet another direction. After years of lurching back and forth, the comparison companies failed to build sustained momentum and fell instead into what we came to call the doom loop. Consider the case of Warner Lambert, the direct comparison company to Gillette. In 1979, Warner Lambert told Business Week that it aimed to be a leading consumer products company. 1 year later, in 1980, it did an abrupt about-face and turned its sights on healthcare, saying, our flat-out aim is to go after Merck, Lilly, SmithKline, everyone and his brother. In 1981, the company reversed course yet again and returned to diversification in consumer goods. 6 years after that, in 1987, Warner Lambert did another U-turn, away from consumer goods to try once again to be like Merck. At the same time, the company spent 3 times as much on consumer goods advertising as on R&D, a somewhat puzzling strategy for a company trying to beat Merck. In the early 1990s, reacting to Clinton-era healthcare reform, the company threw itself into reverse yet again and re-embraced diversification and consumer brands. Each new CEO brought his own new program, and halted the momentum of his predecessor. Ward Hagen tried to create a breakthrough with an expensive acquisition in the hospital supply business in 1982. 3 years later, his successor, Joe Williams, extracted Warner Lambert from the hospital supply business and took a $550 million write-off. He tried to focus the company on beating Merck, but his successor then threw the company back into diversification in consumer goods. And so it went, back and forth, lurch and thrash, to and fro, with each CEO trying to make a mark with his own program. From 1979 through 1998, Warner Lambert underwent 3 major restructurings, one per CEO, hacking away 20,000 people in search of quick breakthrough results. Time and again, the company would attain a burst of results, then slacken, never attaining the sustained momentum of a build-up, breakthrough flywheel. Stock returns flattened, and Warner Lambert disappeared as an independent company, swallowed up by Pfizer. The Warner Lambert case is extreme, but we found some version of the doom loop in every comparison company. While the specific permutations of the doom loop varied from company to company, there were some highly prevalent patterns, 2 of which deserve particular note: the misguided use of acquisitions and the selection of leaders who undid the work of previous generations. Peter Drucker once observed that the drive for mergers and acquisitions comes less from sound reasoning and more from the fact that doing deals is a more exciting way to spend your day than doing actual work. Indeed, the comparison companies would have well understood the popular bumper sticker from the 1980s. When the going gets tough, we go shopping. To understand the role of acquisitions in the process of going from good to great, we undertook a systematic qualitative and quantitative analysis of all acquisitions and divestitures in all the companies in our study from 10 years before the transition date through 1998. While we noticed no particular pattern in the amount or scale of acquisitions, we did note a significant difference in the success rate of acquisitions in the good to great companies versus the comparisons. Why did the good to great companies have a substantially higher success rate with acquisitions, especially major acquisitions? The key to their success was that their big acquisitions generally took place after development of the hedgehog concept and after the flywheel had built significant momentum. They used acquisitions as an accelerator of flywheel momentum, not a creator of it. In contrast, the comparison companies frequently tried to jump right to breakthrough with an acquisition or merger. It never worked. Often, with their core business under siege, the comparison companies would dive into a big acquisition as a way to increase growth, diversify away their troubles, or make a CEO look good. Yet they never addressed the fundamental question: what can we do better than any other company in the world that fits our economic denominator and that we have great passion for? They never learned the simple truth that while you can buy your way to growth, you absolutely cannot buy your way to greatness. 2 big mediocrities joined together never make one great company. The second frequently observed doom loop pattern is that of new leaders who stepped in, stopped an already spinning flywheel, and threw it in a new direction. Consider Harris Corporation, which applied many of the good to great concepts in the early 1960s, and in fact began a classic build-up process that led to breakthrough results. George Dively and his successor Richard Tullis identified a hedgehog concept, based on the understanding that Harris could be the best in the world at applying technology to printing and communications. Although it did not adhere to this concept with perfect discipline, Tullis had a penchant for straying a bit outside the 3 circles, the company nonetheless did make enough progress to produce significant results. It looked like a promising candidate for a good to great transformation, hitting breakthrough in 1975. Then, the flywheel came to a grinding halt. In 1978, Joseph Boyd became chief executive. Boyd had previously been with Radiation Inc., a corporation acquired by Harris years earlier. His first key decision as CEO was to move the company headquarters from Cleveland to Melbourne, Florida, Radiation's hometown, and the location of Boyd's house and 47-foot powerboat, the Lazy Rascal. In 1983, Boyd threw a giant wrench into the flywheel by divesting the printing business. At the time, Harris was the #1 producer of printing equipment in the world. The printing business was one of the most profitable parts of the company, generating nearly a third of total operating profits. What did Boyd do with the proceeds from selling this corporate gem? He threw the company headlong into the office automation business. But could Harris become the best in the world at office automation? Not likely. Horrendous software development programs delayed introduction of Harris's first workstation as the company stumbled onto the battlefield to confront IBM, DEC, and Wang. Then, in an attempt to jump right to a new breakthrough, Harris spent a third of its entire corporate net worth to buy Linear Business Products, a company in the low-end word processing business. Computer World magazine wrote, Boyd targeted the automated office as a key. Unfortunately for Harris, the company had everything but an office product. The attempt to design and market a word processing system met with dismal failure, out of tune with the market, and had to be scrapped before introduction. The flywheel, which had been spinning with great momentum after Dively and Tullis, came detached from the axle, wobbled in the air, and then crashed to a grinding halt. From the end of 1973 to the end of 1978, Harris beat the market by more than 5 times. But from the end of 1978 to the end of 1983, Harris fell 39% behind the market, and by 1988, it had fallen over 70% behind. The doom loop replaced the flywheel. In the hardcover edition of Good to Great, on page 175, we show a diagram of the flywheel, and on page 179, we show a diagram of the doom loop. And I'm going to describe these briefly for you here. The flywheel. Picture it as a clockwise cycle going around, the flywheel building momentum. At the top, you take steps forward consistent with your hedgehog concept. That then accumulates visible results. People then are lined up and energized by those results. The flywheel builds momentum. You take more steps forward consistent with the hedgehog concept. You get more visible results. People are lined up and energized by those increased results. The flywheel builds even more momentum, then more steps, more results, more energy, more momentum, more steps, more results, more energy, more momentum. The doom loop, on the other hand, works the opposite direction. Now picture the circle going the other way. You start with disappointing results, and you react without understanding, some sort of lurching leap into the space or a big acquisition, whatever. You have a new direction, program, leader, event, fad, acquisition, and you get no buildup, no accumulated momentum. And that leads to even more disappointing results, and more reaction without understanding, and more new programs and directions and leaders and events and fads and acquisitions, and you get less buildup, less momentum, more disappointing results, and downward into the doom loop you fall. The flywheel as a wraparound idea of good to great. When I look over the good to great transformations, the one word that keeps coming to mind is consistency. Another word offered to me by physics professor R.J. Peterson is coherence. What is 1 + 1, he asked, then paused for effect. 4. In physics, we have been talking about the idea of coherence, the magnifying effect of one factor upon another. In reading about the flywheel, I couldn't help but think of the principle of coherence. However you phrase it, the basic idea is the same. Each piece of the system reinforces the other parts of the system to form an integrated whole that is much more powerful than the sum of the parts. It is only through consistency over time, through multiple generations, that you get maximum results. In a sense, everything in this book is an extrapolation and description of the pieces of the build-up to breakthrough flywheel pattern. And standing back to survey the overall framework, we see that every factor works together to create this pattern, and each component produces a push on the flywheel. On pages 183-84 of Good to Great's hardback edition, we include a table which summarizes many of the key ideas, but the header of the table is how to tell if you're on the flywheel or if you're in the doom loop. Think of it as two columns. On the left column is signs that you're on the flywheel, and on the right column, signs that you're in the doom loop. And I'm going to now go through the table, doing one side in contrast to the other side. Sign that you're on the flywheel. You follow a pattern of buildup leading to breakthrough. Signs that you're in the doom loop. You skip buildup and try to jump right to breakthrough. Flywheel. You reach breakthrough by an accumulation of steps, one after another, turn by turn of the flywheel. It feels like an organic evolutionary process. Doom loop. Implement big programs, radical change efforts, dramatic revolutions, chronic restructuring, always looking for a miracle moment or a new savior. Flywheel. Confront the brutal facts to see clearly what steps must be taken to build momentum. Doom loop. Embrace fads and engage in management hoopla rather than confront the brutal facts. Signs you're on the flywheel. Attain consistency with a clear hedgehog concept, resolutely staying within the three circles. Sign you're on the doom loop. Demonstrate chronic inconsistency, lurching back and forth and straying far outside the three circles. Flywheel. Follow the pattern of disciplined people, first who, disciplined thought, disciplined action. Doom loop. You jump right to action without disciplined thought and without first getting the right people on the bus. On the flywheel, harness appropriate technologies to your hedgehog concept to accelerate momentum. On the doom loop, run about like Chicken Little in reaction to technology, fearful of being left behind. On the flywheel, make major acquisitions only after breakthrough, if at all, to accelerate momentum. In the doom loop, make major acquisitions before breakthrough in a doomed attempt to create momentum. On the flywheel, spend very little energy trying to motivate or align people. The momentum of the flywheel itself is infectious. Whereas on the doom loop, you spend a lot of time trying to align and motivate people, rallying them around new visions. When you're on the flywheel, you let the results do most of the talking. When you're in the doom loop, you sell the future to compensate for lack of results. And finally, when you're on the flywheel, you maintain consistency over time, each generation building on the work of previous generations. And the flywheel continues to build momentum. When you're in the doom loop, you demonstrate inconsistency over time with each new leader bringing a radical new path. The flywheel grinds to a halt, and the doom loop begins anew. It all starts with the level 5 leaders who naturally gravitate toward the flywheel model. They're less interested in flashy programs that make it look like they're leading with a capital L. They're more interested in the quiet, deliberate process of pushing on the flywheel to produce results with a capital R. Getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. These are all crucial steps in the early stages of buildup. Very important pushes on the flywheel. Equal important is to remember the Stockdale paradox. We're not going to hit breakthrough by Christmas, but if we keep pushing in the right direction, we will eventually hit breakthrough. This process of confronting the brutal facts helps you see the obvious, albeit difficult steps that must be taken to turn the flywheel. Faith in the end game helps you live through the months or years of buildup. Next, when you attain deep understanding about the three circles of your hedgehog concept and begin to push in a consistent direction with that understanding, you hit breakthrough momentum and accelerate with key accelerators. chief among them pioneering the application of technology tied directly back to your three circles. Ultimately, to reach breakthrough means having the discipline to make a series of good decisions consistent with your hedgehog concept. Disciplined action, following from disciplined people who exercise disciplined thought. Disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action. That's it. That's the essence of the breakthrough process. In short, if you diligently and successfully apply each concept in the framework, and you continue to push in a consistent direction on the flywheel, accumulating momentum step by step, turn by turn, you will eventually reach breakthrough. It might not happen today, or tomorrow, or next week. It might not even happen next year, but it will happen. And when it does, you will face an entirely new set of challenges. How to accelerate momentum in response to ever-rising expectations, and how to ensure that the flywheel continues to turn long into the future. In short, your challenge will no longer be how to go from good to great, but how to go from great to enduring great, from good to great to built to last. And that is the subject of the last chapter. Chapter summary: The Flywheel and the Doom Loop. Good to great transformations often look like dramatic revolutionary events to those observing from the outside, but they feel like organic cumulative processes to people on the inside. The confusion of end outcomes, dramatic results, with process, organic and cumulative, skews our perception of what really works over the long haul. No matter how dramatic the end result, the good to great transformations never happened in one fell swoop. There was no single defining action, no grand program, no one killer innovation, no solitary lucky break, no miracle moment. Sustainable transformations follow a predictable pattern of build-up and breakthrough. Like pushing on a giant, heavy flywheel, it takes a lot of effort to get the thing moving at all. But with persistent pushing in a consistent direction over a long period of time, the flywheel builds momentum, eventually hitting a point of breakthrough. The comparison companies followed a different pattern, the doom loop. Rather than accumulating momentum turn by turn of the flywheel, they tried to skip build-up and jump immediately to breakthrough. Then, with disappointing results, they'd lurch back and forth, to and fro, failing to maintain a consistent direction. The comparison companies frequently tried to create a breakthrough with large, misguided acquisitions. The good to great companies, in contrast, principally used large acquisitions only after breakthrough to accelerate momentum in an already fast-spinning flywheel. Some unexpected results. Those inside the good to great companies were often unaware of the magnitude of their transformation at the time. Only later, in retrospect, did it become clear. They had no name, no tagline, no launch event, no program to signify what they were doing at the time. The good to great leaders spent essentially no energy trying to create alignment, motivate the troops, or manage change. Under the right conditions, the problems of commitment, alignment, motivation, and change largely take care of themselves. Alignment principally follows from results and momentum, not the other way around. And finally, in today's investor world, we learned that short-term pressures of Wall Street were not inconsistent with following this model. The flywheel effect is not in conflict with these pressures. Indeed, it is the key to managing them. Chapter 9. From Good to Great to Built to Last. It is your work in life that is the ultimate seduction. Pablo Picasso. When we began the Good to Great research project, we had a dilemma. How should we think about the ideas in Built to Last while doing the Good to Great research? Built to Last, based on a 6-year research project conducted at Stanford Business School in the early 1990s, answered the question, what does it take to start and build an enduring great company from the ground up? My research mentor and co-author, Jerry Iporis, and I studied 18 enduring great companies, institutions that stood the test of time, tracing their founding in some cases back to the 1800s, while becoming the iconic great companies of the late 20th century. We examined companies like Procter & Gamble, which was founded in 1837, American Express, founded in 1850, Johnson & Johnson, founded in 1886, and GE, founded in 1892. One of the companies, Citicorp, now Citigroup, was founded in 1812, the same year Napoleon marched into Moscow. The youngest companies in the study were Walmart and Sony, which traced their origins back to 1945. Just like this book, we used direct comparison companies, 3M versus Norton, Walt Disney versus Columbia Pictures, Marriott versus Howard Johnson, and so forth for 18 matched pair comparisons. We sought to identify the essential distinctions between great companies and good companies as they endure over decades, perhaps even centuries. When I had the first summer research team assembled for the Good to Great project, I asked, what should be the role of Built to Last in doing this study? I don't think it should play any role, said Brian Bagley. I didn't join this team to do a derivative piece of work. Neither did I, said Allison Sinclair. I'm excited about a new project and a new question. It wouldn't be very fulfilling to just fill in the pieces of your other book. Wait a minute, I responded. We spent 6 years on that previous study. It might be helpful to build on our previous work. Well, I seem to recall that you got the idea for the Good to Great study when a McKinsey partner said that Built to Last didn't answer the question of how to change a good company into a great company, said Paul Weissman. What if the answers are different, Jim? The debate continued for a number of weeks. Then Stephanie Judd weighed in with the argument that swayed me. I love the ideas in Built to Last, and that's what worries me. I'm afraid that if we start with Built to Last as the frame of reference, we'll just go round in circles and we'll just prove our own biases. It became clear that there would be substantially less risk in starting from scratch, setting out to discover what we would, whether it matched Built to Last or not. Early in the research, then, we made a very important decision. We decided to conduct the research for Good to Great as if Built to Last didn't even exist, had never been written, had never been done. This was the only way to clearly see the key factors in transforming a good company into a great one with minimal bias from our previous work. Then later, we could return to ask, how, if at all, do the two studies relate? 5 years later, with Good to Great complete, we were able to stand back, look at the two works in the context of each other. And looking across the two studies, I offer the following 4 conclusions. 1. When I consider the enduring great companies from Built to Last, I now see substantial evidence that their early leaders did in fact follow the Good to Great framework. The only real difference is that they did so as entrepreneurs in small, early-stage enterprises trying to get off the ground, rather than as CEOs trying to transform established companies from good to great. 2. In an ironic twist, I now see Good to Great not as a sequel to Built to Last, but actually as a prequel. You apply the findings in this book, in Good to Great, to create sustained great results as a startup or an established organization, and then apply the findings in Built to Last to go from great results into an enduring great company. 3. To make the shift from a company with sustained great results into an enduring great company of iconic stature, you apply the central concept from Built to Last. Discover your core values and your core purpose beyond just making money, what we call the core ideology, and combine this with the dynamic of preserve the core, stimulate progress, which comes from the Built to Last work. 4. A tremendous resonance exists between the two studies. The ideas from each enrich and inform the ideas in the other. In particular, Good to Great answers a fundamental question, raised but left unanswered in Built to Last. What is the difference between a good BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal, and a bad BHAG? Good to Great in the early stages of Built to Last companies. Looking back on the Built to Last study, it appears that the enduring great companies did in fact go through a process of build-up to breakthrough, following the Good to Great framework during their formative years. Consider the build-up breakthrough flywheel pattern in the evolution of Walmart. Most people think that Sam Walton just exploded onto the scene with his visionary idea for rural discount retailing, hitting breakthrough almost as a startup company. But nothing could be further from the truth. Walton began in 1945 with a single dime store. He didn't open his second store until 7 years later. Walton built incrementally, step by step, turn by turn of the flywheel, until the hedgehog concept of large discount marts popped out as a natural evolutionary step in the mid-1960s. It took Walton a quarter of a century, 25 years, to grow from that single dime store to a chain of 38 Walmarts. Then, from 1970 to 2000, Walmart hit breakthrough momentum and exploded to over 3,000 stores with over 150 billion, yes, billion in revenues. Just like the story of the chicken jumping out of the egg that we discussed in the flywheel chapter, Walmart had been incubating for decades before the egg cracked open. As Walton himself wrote, "Somehow over the years, people have gotten the impression that Walmart was just this great idea that turned into an overnight success. But it was an outgrowth of everything we'd been doing since 1945. And like most overnight successes, it was about 20 years in the making." If there ever was a classic case of build-up leading to a hedgehog concept, followed by breakthrough momentum in the flywheel, Walmart is it. The only real difference is that Sam Walton followed the model as an entrepreneur, building a great company from the ground up, rather than as a CEO transforming an established company from good to great. But it's the same basic idea. Hewlett-Packard provides another excellent example. Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard's entire founding concept for HP was not what, but who, starting with each other. They'd been best friends in graduate school and simply wanted to build a great company together that would attract other people with similar values and standards. The founding minutes of their first meeting on August 23, 1937, begin by stating that they would design, manufacture, and sell products in the electrical engineering fields, very broadly defined. But then those same founding minutes go on to say, the question of what to manufacture was postponed. Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard stumbled around for months trying to come up with something, anything, that would get the company out of the garage. They considered yacht transmitters, air conditioning control devices, medical devices, phonograph amplifiers, you name it. They built an electronic bowling alley sensor, a clock drive for a telescope, an electronic shock jiggle machine to help overweight people lose weight. It really didn't matter what the company made in the very early days, so long as it made a technical contribution and would enable Hewlett and Packard to build a company together with other like-minded people. It was the ultimate first who, we're best friends. Then what? We don't know what we're going to make. Startup. Later, as Hewlett and Packard scaled up, as they got the flywheel turning, they stayed true to the guiding principle of first who. After World War II, even as revenue shrank with the end of their wartime contracts, they hired a whole batch of fabulous people streaming out of government labs with nothing specific in mind for them to do. Recall Packard's Law, which we cited in Chapter 3. No company can grow revenues consistently faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth and still become a great company. Hewlett and Packard lived and breathed this concept and obtained a surplus of great people whenever the opportunity presented itself. Hewlett and Packard were themselves consummate Level 5 leaders. first as entrepreneurs, and later as company builders. Years after HP had established itself as one of the most important technology companies in the world, Hewlett maintained a remarkable personal humility. In 1972, HP Vice President Barney Oliver wrote a recommendation letter to the IEEE Awards Board for what they call the Founders Award. He wrote, "While our success has been gratifying, it has not spoiled our founders. Only recently, at an executive council meeting, Hewlett remarked, 'Look, we've grown because the industry grew. We were lucky enough to be sitting on the nose of a rocket when it took off. We don't deserve a damn bit of credit.'" After a moment's silence, while everyone digested this humbling comment, Packard said, "Well, Bill, at least we didn't louse it up completely." Shortly before his death, I had the opportunity to meet David Packard. Despite being one of Silicon Valley's first self-made billionaires, he lived in the same small house that he and his wife built for themselves in 1957, overlooking a simple orchard. The tiny kitchen with its dated linoleum and the simply furnished living room bespoke a man who needed no material symbols to proclaim, "I'm a billionaire. I'm important. I'm successful." His idea of a good time, said Bill Terry, who worked with Packard for 36 years, was to get some of his best friends together and string some barbed wire. Packard bequeathed his $5.6 billion estate to a charitable foundation, and upon his death, his family created a eulogy pamphlet with a photo of him sitting on a tractor in farming clothes. The caption made no reference to his stature as one of the great industrialists of the 20th century. It simply read, "David Packard, 1912 to 1996, rancher, etc. Level 5, indeed." Core ideology, the extra dimension of enduring greatness. During our interview with Bill Hewlett, we asked him what he was most proud of in his long career. "As I look back on my life's work," he said, "I'm probably most proud of having helped to create a company that by virtue of its values, practices, and success has had a tremendous impact on the way companies are managed around the world." The HP Way, as it became known, reflected a deeply held set of core values that distinguished the company more than any of its products. These values included technical contribution, deep, abiding respect for the individual, responsibility to the communities in which the company operates, and a deeply held belief that profit is not the fundamental goal of a company. These principles, while somewhat standard today, were radical and progressive in the 1950s. David Packard said of businessmen from those days, "While they were reasonably polite in their disagreement, it was quite evident that they firmly believed that I was not one of them, and obviously not qualified to manage an important enterprise." Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard exemplify a key extra dimension that helped elevate their company from one with just great results to an elite status, to a company of an iconic stature. That extra dimension is a guiding philosophy or a core ideology which consists of core values and a core purpose, a reason for being beyond just making money. These resemble the principles in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, never perfectly followed, but always present as an inspiring standard and an answer to the question of why it is important that we exist. Enduring great companies don't exist merely to deliver returns to shareholders. In a truly great company, profits and cash flow become like blood and water to a healthy body. They're not the point of life. They're just essential for life. We wrote in Built to Last about Merck's decision in the 1980s to develop and distribute a drug that cured river blindness. This painful disease afflicted over 1 million people with parasitic worms that swarmed through the eyes to cause blindness. Because those who had the disease, tribal people in remote places like the Amazon, had no money, Merck initiated the creation of an independent distribution system to get the drug to remote villages and gave the drug away free to millions of people around the world. To be clear, Merck is not a charity organization, nor does it view itself as such. Indeed, it has consistently outperformed the market as a highly profitable company, growing to nearly $6 billion in profits and beating the market by over 10 times from 1946 to 2000. Yet, despite its remarkable financial performance, Merck does not view its ultimate reason for being as making money. In 1950, George Merck II, son of the founder, set forth his company's philosophy. We try to remember that medicine is for the patient. It is not for the profits. The profits follow. And if we have remembered that, they have never failed to appear. The better we have remembered it, the larger they have been. An important caveat to the concept of core values is that there are no specific right core values for becoming an enduring great company. No matter what core value you propose, we found an enduring great company that does not have that specific core value. A company need not have passion for its customers, Sony didn't, or respect for the individual, Disney didn't, or quality, Walmart didn't, or social responsibility, Ford didn't, in order to become enduring and great. This was one of the most paradoxical findings from Built to Last. Core values are indeed essential for enduring greatness. And yet, it doesn't seem to matter what those core values are. The point is not what core values you have, but that you have core values, that you know what they are, that you build them explicitly into the organization, and that you preserve them over time. This notion of preserving your core ideology is a central feature of enduring great companies. The obvious question is, how do you preserve the core and yet adapt to a changing world? The answer? Embrace the key concept from Built to Last: preserve the core and stimulate progress. Enduring great companies preserve their core values and purpose while their business strategies and operating practices endlessly adapt to a changing world. This is the magical combination of preserve the core and stimulate progress. The story of Walt Disney exemplifies this duality. In 1923, an energetic 21-year-old animator moved from Kansas City to Los Angeles, and he tried to get a job in the movie business. No film company would hire him, so he used his meager savings to rent a camera, set up a studio in his uncle's garage, and began making animated cartoons. In 1934, Mr. Disney took the bold step, never before taken, to create a successful, full-length animated feature film. He did Snow White, then Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi. In the 1950s, Disney moved into television with the Mickey Mouse Club. Also in the 1950s, Walt Disney paid a fateful visit to a number of amusement parks and came away disgusted, calling them dirty, phony places run by tough-looking people. He decided that Disney could build something much better, perhaps even the best in the world. And the company launched a whole new business in theme parks, first with Disneyland and later with Walt Disney World and Epcot Center. Over time, Disney theme parks have become a cornerstone experience for many families from all over the world. Throughout all these dramatic changes, from cartoons to full-length feature animation, from Mickey Mouse Club to Disney World, the company held firmly to a consistent set of core values that included a passionate belief in creative imagination, fanatic attention to detail, abhorrence of cynicism, and preservation of what they call the Disney magic. Mr. Disney also instilled a remarkable constancy of purpose that permeated every new Disney venture, namely, to bring happiness to millions, especially children. This purpose cut across national borders and has endured through time. When my wife and I visited Israel in 1995, we met the man who brought Disney products to the Middle East. The whole idea, he told us with pride, is to bring a smile to a child's face. That's really important here, where there aren't enough smiles on the children. Walt Disney provides a classic case of preserve the core and stimulate progress, holding a core ideology fixed while changing strategies and practices over time. And its adherence to this principle is the fundamental reason why it has endured as a great company. On page 196 and 197 of the hardcover edition, you will see a diagram, if you look in the book, that is a yin and yang diagram. This is the way that we came to describe the whole preserve, core, stimulate, progress idea. The left side of the yin-yang is about preserve. The right side of the yin-yang is about change. On the left side of the yin-yang, you have preserve core values and core purpose. On the right hand of the yin-yang, you have change. Change cultural practices, change operating practices, change goals, change strategies, change culture, change everything that's not part of those values and that core purpose. And it is this yin and yang dynamic between the two, the tension between the two, that provides that magic elixir of continuity and change.